Good morning and namaskarams to all of you. I would like to start by saying that it is quite a challenge for me to talk about the music of Ramnad Krishnan simply because I have to confess that I'm fully biased towards, I'm totally immersed in and completely in love with the music of Ramnad Krishnan, with the music of musicians like Sri Ramnad Krishnan, T. Brinda, and T. Bala Saraswati. Why is it that we feel drawn to the music of a certain musician? Of course, there are several reasons, but to put it very simply, we are drawn to the sound of the music of a certain musician. Every genre of music has its own sounds. Now, we are talking about Carnatic music here. It has its own sounds. We have the instrumental sounds, we have the vocal sounds. Even within vocal Carnatic music, there are so many styles of vocalization. Depends on the voice of the musician, the technique of a certain musician, how he or she sings, what he or she sings. And that's the sound of that music. And when we listen, am I audible? Koncha venuma? When we listen to a certain musician, we are drawn to that sound that that musician brings forth with his or her music. Now, of course, we know that Carnatic music has had a galaxy of great musicians, each one of whom has contributed in his or her own way to making Carnatic music the great art form that it is today. And yet, when we listen to a certain musician, we instinctively feel drawn to that music. Now, I had never seen or heard Sri Ramnad Krishnan live, and yet I feel a sense of warm familiarity, or almost a cushion like comfort when I listen to his music, and one that I go back to every time that I want to reaffirm my own belief in everything beautiful and soulful in music. It is also very difficult for me to describe his music in words because it is an experience. It is a very deeply felt experience, and so I would like to thank Rasika Ranjani Sabha for giving me this opportunity to actually analyze, to break down that experience into specifics, to put it into words, and to be able to share with you everything that I have come to adore about this great musician. Music in Perpetuity is the name of this series of lectures, and I think it's extremely apt while talking about Ramnad Krishnan because his music is as fresh, as evergreen, and as relevant today as when he sang it more than 5 decades ago. Also, Ramnad Krishnan is one musician who always features in every conversation that musicians have amongst themselves. And so when I speak today, I'm talking not only of my own thoughts and ideas, I'm also reflecting the thoughts of so many other musicians and people who I have had these conversations with or who I have heard conversations between. In my case, my grand aunt, Srimati Sulochana Nagarajan, was an established teacher of Carnatic music in Bombay. Now, she was fanatic about Ramnad Krishnan's music. I don't think there is a single concert of his in Bombay that she ever missed. And of course, those days they had access only to cassettes. And she had managed to collect through her network of friends and other people in Bombay a selection of Ramnad Krishnan's cassettes. And of course, she also used to diligently record his national programs on All India Radio. And those tapes would be heard endlessly on loop till it gave way. அதையும் வந்து கட் பண்ணி ஒட்டி அதை விடாமல் she would listen to it endlessly. And thanks to her, my mother became a huge fan of Ramnad Krishnan, and throughout my childhood, I heard snippets of conversations between them about a certain phrase in Begada or in Sri Ranjani or Lavanya Rama. And when I later took to music seriously, it was my mother who turned my attention to many aspects of Ramnad Krishnan's music. Every time I learnt a new raga or a new composition and practiced it at home, she would point out a particular, or she would sing a certain Ramnad Krishnan phrase that would be so apt for that composition or for that ragam. I still remember I had learnt my first, many years ago, my first composition in Sri Ranjani. It was Broche Varevare. And I was trying, ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்பட்டு I was trying an alapana in Sri Ranjani. And மேலே போய் ஷட்ஜமத்துக்கு அப்புறம் I didn't know what to do. ஏதோ I was going round and round in circles. அந்த மாதிரி ஏதோ பாடியிருந்தேன். She walked into the room and said, and I just sat up and I said, how did you get this Sri Ranjani? And she said, just learn Bhuvini Dasudane from Ramnad Krishnan and you will get it. And I searched for a cassette. I found the Bhuvini Dasudane. I learnt it. And after that, that song and the sound of Sri Ranjani in his voice is the association that I go back to every time, not only for that song, but for anything in Sri Ranjani. So that was my introduction to Ramnad Krishnan. And that is what he meant to me. Later, of course, I came to know very closely and interact very closely with his family, all his family members, and especially Sri Ramanathan, his son, who is with us today, who very generously and with a lot of affection shared all of his father's music with me, as he has done with so many other musicians. And I would like to remember here and be grateful to my mother and to Sri Ramanathan for what Ramnad Krishnan means to me today in my life and in my music. All young musicians from the 1980s to the present have gone through and continue to go through what we call the Ramnad Krishnan phase in our lives, in our music. All of us have imitated him, or let me put it this way, tried to imitate him and not always successfully. A certain phrase or a certain ragam or a certain composition in the Ramnad Krishnan way. And அது பண்ணச்ச எங்களுக்கே ஒரு சென்ஸ் ஆஃப் ஒரு செல்ஃப் ஒர்த், ஓ எங்களுக்கு அப்படி ஞானம் இருக்கா, அந்த மாதிரி பாடுறதுக்கு ஓஹோ ஏதோ இருக்குது போல இருக்குது. நான் பாட முடிஞ்சதா இல்லையான்றது இஸ் அ டிஃப்ரெண்ட் இஷ்யூ, that I will not go into. But that is the power of Ramnad Krishnan. Now, before I go into specifics of his music and his style, I will touch very briefly upon his background. He was one of 5 brothers, all of whom were trained in Carnatic music. 2 of his brothers, Lakshmi Narayanan and Venkatachalam, were trained to play the violin, and Raghavan and Ishwaran were trained to play the mridangam. It was Ramnad Krishnan who took to vocal music. His guru was Ramanadapuram C. Shankara Shivam, and it was thanks to that all of them took the prefix of Ramnad or Ramanadapuram to their names. It was after moving to Madras in 1936 that Ramnad Krishnan got exposed to the legendary musicians of his time, and he seems to have taken a particular liking to Sri G.N. Balasubramaniam, GNB's music, and was often a front row audience at his concerts. And of course, we see marked influences of GNB's style in Ramnad Krishnan's own music. But it was thanks to another friend, Muthukrishna Swami Iyengar, who was the disciple of Kanchipuram Naina Pillai, that he got introduced to the music of Veena Dhannamal and started attending her famous Friday soirees in Georgetown. And it was this introduction with Dhannamal, and of course later getting to know T. Brinda, that marked a definite turning point in Ramnad Krishnan's own music. The way he brought these 2 diverse and almost polar opposite schools of thought in Carnatic music, the GNB school and the Veena Dhannamal school, the way he took the best of these 2 schools, the way he amalgamated them, assimilated them, and added his own unique shades and flavor and created a style totally his own, is enough proof of his musical acumen and intelligence. I will also barely now quickly touch upon the overall highlights before I go forward. All musicians and scholars and connoisseurs use certain adjectives while talking about Ramnad Krishnan: nuanced, elegant, delicate, aesthetic, precise, understated. They all agree that his music was raga music, with the ragam, the melody and its emotion shining through everything that he sang, whether it was compositional forms or the creative aspects, the manodharma. Now, what is it about Ramnad Krishnan's music that is so spectacular? He sang the same ragams, the same compositions, and pretty much within the same traditional format that all musicians of his era or before him did. Yet, I think it was the way he sang, the way he invested himself and his creative intelligence into his music that made all the difference. And what I find even more fascinating is that there are so many contrasts, so many opposites that he bridged very effortlessly in his music. He was traditional yet innovative. He was cerebral yet soulful. He was intricate but clear, delicate yet majestic, virtuosic yet classy, nuanced yet robust, contained and yet complete. He challenged the notion of what was then considered masculine and feminine music. In fact, he was the perfect balance between the two. Even in the most so called male style pallavis or compositions, there was a certain grace, a certain fluidity in his singing that was so feminine. So he actually broke these stereotypes very successfully, and he was probably the first musician, first male musician to do so. And to me, what is extremely significant is that there was a Shuddham in every aspect of his music. And by Shuddham, I do not mean only Shruti Shuddham, which of course was there in plenty. And Shruti Shuddham doesn't mean singing one note in tune. It's singing the obvious note in tune, it is singing the not so obvious modulations or the movements between notes or the phrases. All of this was in tune. The perfect and optimal pace at which he sang every phrase, whether in an alapana or in the composition, there was perfect Laya Shuddham, and Laya Shuddham with and without talam. And the way he managed to sing even the fastest phrases without losing gamaka shuddham. There was gamaka shuddham in that. There was no loss of detail or gamakams even in his fastest phrases. So there was shuddham in every aspect of his music. So I do not think that it was just his voice that was aligned to Shruti. I think his whole mind and psyche were aligned to Shuddham, to beauty, and to everything that was musically aesthetic. With that introduction, I will now talk in detail about specific aspects of his musical style, and I will also play certain excerpts to further illustrate my points. I would like to begin with the voice. Now, what is a good voice in Carnatic music is a debatable and very subjective topic and can be discussed endlessly. But to put it down very simply, any good vocalist needs to be aware of two things. One is his or her voice and the possibilities of that voice, the negatives and the positives, what he or she can do or cannot do with the voice. And on the other hand, should know, of course, his or her own music, the extent of what he or she learns and practices and internalizes. Now, the challenge for any good vocalist is to bring these two together. And I think this is where Ramnad Krishnan scores, in how he employed his voice to suit his artistic temperament. On the one hand were his ideas and his conceptualizations of the music itself. And on the other side, he knew exactly what his voice could express. And he brought these two together brilliantly and used his voice to the fullest potential to deliver his best musical ideas. He sang everything with a sense of surety and ease. காதில் விழச்ச ஒரு சுலபமாக சௌக்கியமாக இருக்கும். But it's only when we try to sing like that that we realize how almost impossible it is to deliver it in the same way with the same precision or clarity or nuance. Ramnad Krishnan was also possibly the first musician to highlight tonal modulation despite belonging to the mic-less era. Those were the times when musicians had to sing either in a high pitch or in the higher octaves and to throw their voices a lot just to be even heard. Despite belonging to that era, Ramnad Krishnan brought in tonal modulation. And so beautifully. There would be a sudden, unexpected softness in the middle of a full-bodied phrase. For example, there are many ways to vocalize in Carnatic music. The Tulasam ma ma inta tulasam ma ma inta tula அப்படின்னா எல்லாரும் பாடுவோம். அவர் வந்து துளசம் இந்த அந்த அந்த ஒரு சாஃப்ட்னஸ், அது வந்து ஒரு ஆர்டிஃபிஷியலாக ஓஹோ இங்கே சாஃப்டாக பண்ணால் இம்பேக்ட் க்ரியேட் ஆகுமோ அந்த மாதிரி சாஃப்ட்னஸ் இல்லை. இட் கேம் ஃப்ரம் அ டீப் internalized understanding of the shades of vocalization. அது I'll now play you that I'll play you a couple of excerpts and you can see how he used this technique so beautifully in everything that he sang. The other technique that he used very beautifully is toning down the volume as he went upper in the octave. So we find him singing in full throated expression in the Mandarasthai and up to the Panchamam. or Daivatam in the Madhyasai. And then beyond that, you would see that, and that was also not done with a false voiced kind of a approach, and it was very contextual, and there was a context and there was a logic to why he used that softening like that very effectively, and we find him doing it in anything that he sang. His was an era where most male vocalists fashioned their styles after Nadaswaram music, with long drawn phrases around a note, but he chose the more delicate Veena style, with shorter phrases, more nuanced phrases. He was, again, probably one of the first musicians of his time to do so, and again, possibly an effect of the Dhanamal school on his music. Generally, it is said that a musician who sings very fast or super fast or briga kind of music cannot handle the slow or the gamakam music, or vice versa. But Ramnad Krishnan handled both without any problem. He combined dexterity, speed, with great delicateness and with great nuance without losing clarity or detail. His ability to sing Madhyamakala phrases and Briga phrases. When I say Madhyamakalam, these are phrases which have even spacing between notes. And Briga phrases are, of course, unevenly spaced phrases. He could sing both of these without losing the gamakams, which is very difficult because it's easier to sing gamakams at the slower or the mid-range speed. The faster you go, the more there is this tendency to sacrifice the gamakam and sing plainer notes. But if you listen to Ramnad Krishnan, you see that he doesn't sacrifice the gamakams in any speed. Now that requires great skill. Now I'll play you short excerpts of 3 of his alapanas, and you can see that all the points that I have spoken about, you will be able to hear in these excerpts.
Na
T.M. Krishna once mentioned in a talk of his that there was a sensuality in Ramnad Krishnan's voice and the way he vocalized, and I think I fully agree with him because the Sangatis are special because they come from that sensual voice. It was not just the Sangati or the phrase. If it was, any other musician who sang it, if they tried to sing it the same way, it should sound the same way. But it is not. It was the voice behind that music that also created the magic. That's what I think. Now I come to his repertoire. Of course, like most of his contemporaries, he had a vast repertoire and he learnt compositions from several sources. But when he rendered them, you knew that they had been Ramnadized. He sang them with the special Ramnad Krishnan touch. And of course, now we have so many compositions which, when we listen to, the almost only musician who comes to mind is Ramnad Krishnan. For example, we have Mummurtulu in Athana, Sanatana in Phalamanjari, Narada Guru, Darbar, Srimanini, Lavanyarama, Purnasharjam, Nejesina, Purnachandrika, Yangyadulu, Jayamanohari, Bhuvini Dasudane, Sri Ranjani, Iniyana Pech in Sahana, and so many more. These have become his signature kritis. As I said, he is the musician that comes to mind when these compositions and sometimes the ragams behind them are mentioned. Now, he is also said to have been particularly fond of Patnam Subramaniya Iyar's kritis, and there are many that he popularized. To name a few, Abhimanamennatu in Begada, Etunammi Navu, Saveri, Nejesina Purnachandrika, Varamulo Sagi in Kiravani, Intakante Kavalena in Kannada, and so on. He is said to have been open to learning a good composition from any source. For example, he learnt 80 Janmamidi from T. Vishwanathan, brother of T. Bala Saraswati, which he later taught to the Alatur brothers. Now, there's actually a very nice story there. He learnt Palukutache in Phalamanjari and Naravara Raghunandana in Manirangu from the notations of Patnam Subramaniya Iyer published by the Music Academy. In fact, his disciple, Srimati Ritarajan, has mentioned how he learnt several compositions from his own disciples. From his senior disciple, Usha Sagar, who had also learnt from Dhanamal's elder daughter, Rajalakshmi. He learnt the Bilahari Javali, Telesi Vagalella, and Nyayamugadura in Riti Gaula. From Rita Rajan herself, he learnt the Ananda Bhairavi Padam, Pattakura, and Sariyavare in Sahana, among other songs. And Sariyavare, she says, used to be rendered actually quite fast and had a pretty simple structure when she learnt it. But when he learnt it from her and spent some time on it, she found that he had lessened the pace, he had made it slower, and of course added his own touches to the Sahana, that ragam, and then finally it shone the way he sang Sariyavare. And I'll play you a bit of that now. He learnt Parulanamata, the famous, now famous Kapi Javali, from Veena Dhanamal's sister Rupavati, who was in Hyderabad, and he sang this Javali without the Antara Gandharam, which is how actually Brindama sang it. She sang it with the Antara Gandharam, but he sang it without it. He sang it with the Sadharana Gandharam. Parulanamata namavadu Prananayakas. How we've heard this Javali. Prananayaka. That's how he would sing it. And what is interesting is that we have a recording of his Alapana in Kapi, which he has sung as a prefix to this Javali, where he has sung the Alapana without the Antara Gandharam or the Kakali Nishadam that we usually sing in Kapi. I'll now play you an excerpt of that.
Parulanamata namavadu prananayana Parulanamata namavadu prananayana Parulanamata namavadu prananayana
Speaking of Padams and Javalis, he learnt several of these from Brindama and Muktama, and he was probably the only musician, male musician of his times, who handled these compositions with such flamboyance and such depth of expression, and also that special technique of singing just a little away from the beat. In fact, the talam would fade away in his lilting renditions of these compositions. I will now play you short excerpts from the Bhairavi Padam and the Kannada Javali. Another very unique technique that he used is the ஒதுக்கி பாடுறது, just singing off the beat. இப்போ வந்து ஒரு தாளத்தில் வந்து ஒரு ஈவன் பீட் காலப்பிரமாணம் போயின்னு இருக்குச்ச, most musicians tend to sing to that beat, but he would sing, he had such a perfect conceptualization of those spaces between the beats that he could fit any nuanced phrase even between those spaces, even if it was at an uneven pace. That is a technique which he was a master of. And I'll now play you Shankari Nive, another one of his all-time favorites, where you will see how he has used this technique of singing off the beat. for all that he was so creative and so innovative, when it came to rendering compositions, he never took liberties with the structure of the song. And he sang them properly, all sangatis twice, without tampering with the original structure of the song. Sometimes we listen to certain musicians who are very creative, but the whole composition seems like an endless nerval. அந்த மாதிரிலாம் ஒன்றும் இல்லாமல், this is true across multiple recordings of the same song. When we hear, we find that he has stuck to this discipline throughout his composition rendering. With that, I will now come to the next segment, that is Raga. How he conceptualized Raga and his renditions of Raga Alapana. Now, in Indian classical music, which is Raga music, the Raga has its own emotion, its own mood. And many times we find that musicians train to produce theatrical profusions in the name of emotional singing. Now, Ramnad Krishnan did not do this, because I feel that his was a very profound, a very deeply internalized understanding of the actual emotion of the ragam, the true emotion of the ragam that lies at the core of that ragam itself. And his Alapana style did not suffer from any of the usual issues. Neither did he see an Alapana as the stringing of notes and phrases together, nor did he see it as an outcome of Sampradayam alone, a preconceived, pre-tailored offering without much scope for change or innovation, or without much difference between a Kriti rendering and an Alapana rendering. What he personified was the third way. Every time that he sang an Alapana, he sang it with a freshness, with a depth of expression that went straight to the heart. I feel that he was personally and emotionally invested in every ragam that he sang. Otherwise, it would have been a technical, emotionless exercise for him and for the listener. Now, he did sing within the traditional format. He was keenly aware of Sampradayam, he was keenly aware of grammar and its rules, just as his contemporaries and his predecessors. But there was a Ramnad Krishnan touch to the way he sang. And what was this special touch? Can it be described? I think the magic lay in the conception, the way he visualized the ragam. First of all, he avoided the usual predictable, hackneyed, trite phrases. Secondly, he was not very stuck on structure, on range. இப்போ கீழே ஆரம்பித்து ஒரு நோட்டாக டெவலப் பண்ணி அதை நடுவில் பாடி மேலே பாடி அப்புறம் ஃபாஸ்ட் ஃப்ரேசஸ் பாடி அப்புறம் கீழே வந்து அப்புறம் மேலே கீழே போய், திஸ் டிப்பிக்கல் ஸ்ட்ரக்சர் தட் வி ஆல் அசோசியேட் வித் த டெவலப்மெண்ட் ஆஃப் அன் ஆலாப்பன, he was not stuck on that. At least definitely not at the expense of raga aesthetic. What he did, his was a more free-flowing style. But even in that free-flowing style, we find that he was not meandering without purpose. There is a definite structure, there is a logic, there is an aesthetic in the way he structured his alapanas. But instead of a step-by-step development, we see it's like a bird's eye view. At the end of it, you get the whole larger picture of the ragam. That was his approach. Also, I have seen that he did not dwell too long in the tarasthai, as was the practice, especially those days, because as I said, you had to sing high to be able to even be heard. And of course, it created an impact. Now, he did sing high, and he sang it beautifully, with modulation, with full vocal thrust, with everything else. But it was sung in context and in proportion. We are also told, now this is something that I have thought about a lot. We are told, all students of music are told, that there has to be the element of contrast in alapanas, especially with regard to kala pramanam. But how we interpret that is singing slow phrases, singing medium phrases, singing fast phrases. Adha vandu black and white ah pirichidrom. Now, how he brought in that element of contrast is not like that. He brought in contrast with the way he sang the phrase, within the phrase itself, and not because he tried to include different speeds and go up and down the scale. to create a sense of contrast. His alapanas had slow gamakams juxtaposed with sudden flashes of briga, plain tuneful notes in the midst of a string of gamakams, a nuanced phrase with a lot of filigree like detail, followed by a pause and a thought out, meaningful musical pause. A softly modulated carve of phrases in the higher octave contrasted with full deep throated expression in the lower octave. So these were the ways in which he created so much of contrast in his alapana. And now I'll play you an excerpt of his Sahana alapana, and you see how he brings in so much of contrast even in that. When it comes to ragas, handling of ragas, he handled the entire gamut of ragas from Ghana ragas like Todi and Shankarabharanam, Bhairavi and Kambodi, to Rakti ragas like Begada, Sahana, Shurati, Saveri, to minor ragas like Palamanjari, Purnachandrika, Umabharanam, Purnasharjam, to scalar ragas like Arabhi, Hamsanadam, Hamsadvani, to Hindustani ragas also like Shuddha Sarang and Darbari Kannada. Now, just like we associate a Todi with T.N. Rajaratnam Pillai, or we associate Karara Priya with Shemagudi Srinivas Iyer, the only musician we associate Begada and Sahana with first is Ramnad Krishnan. Now, I have a collection of just his Begadas, of just his Sahanas, and every time I find that he has sung it with a unique touch, with a freshness, with a difference. And not only that, when I listen to the same alapana every time, I actually find something new to take from that. Oh, idu ipdi padirkaran. And that is just phenomenal how he has managed to sing these ragams with such flair. I will now play you my personal favorite, his Begada alapana. I don't think, at least I have heard another Begada alapana which is so beautiful. Another very rare technique which he used, which I used to wonder about a lot. I often noticed it in his alapanas and even in his composition renderings. And I often wondered about it, but I did not know what name to put to it till I heard the musician Srimati Saumya call it the reverse kampitam. Kampitam in reverse. Now, kampitam is a gamakam that we use very, very commonly in Carnatic music. For example, in Hari Kambodi, இப்படி தான் பாடுவோம் எல்லாருமே. அவர் வந்து அந்த அந்த அசெண்டிங் ஃப்ரேஸில் கம்பித்தம் இஸ் யூஸ்வலி சங் ஃப்ரம் த ப்ரீவியஸ் நோட். அவர் வந்து அடுத்த நோட்லேருந்து பாடுவார். கம பத நீ, அந்த நீயை மேலேருந்து அப்படின்னு பாடுறதுக்கு பதில் அந்த அந்த மத்தியமத்தை பஞ்சமத்துலேருந்து பாடுவார். ஸோ திஸ் வாஸ் அ டெக்னிக் விச் ஹி யூஸ்ட் very often in many things that he sang, and I'll now play you some short excerpts of his reverse kampitam. He also used phrases from Padams and Javalis in his alapanas. For example, Minchi Payyada Nunchi Minchi Payyada இல்லைனா யால தன யால பத ரேமோ, அதெல்லாம் ரொம்ப ஈஸியாக ரொம்ப அழகாக அவர் வந்து ஆலாப்பனாலே எடுத்துன்னு வருவார். தாமரசக்ஷுனி பைரவி பதம், அந்த அந்த ஃப்ரேசஸ்லாம் பியூட்டிஃபுல்லாக பதமில் வரும். அதுலேருந்து he used to incorporate it into his alapanas so delicately. I will now play you some excerpts. also he also sometimes used unusual notes which are not necessarily part of the scale of the ragam very, very beautifully. For example, he would sing the Sadharana Gandharam in Sahana, or in Purna Chandrika, he would sing the Kaishika Nishadam instead of the Kakali Nishadam. Na 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 அப்படின்னு பாடாம na na அந்த 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 ஒரு சின்ன ஒரு ஃபோர்ஸ் would make it sound like the சாதாரண காந்தாரம். na 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 ne jesi na ne and the little force. But at no point in listening to him would I ever feel that there was I never felt that it was a grammatical error. There was so much Purna Chandrika even in that Kaichaka Nishadam. There's so much of Sahana even in that Sadharana Gandharam that it almost adds another shade of beauty to the ragam. And now I will play you an excerpt of that. Another technique that he used, which was very special to him, was the use of symmetrical or identical sounding phrases in different regions of the raga. For example, na 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 na. I'm singing in his shruti. Na 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 na. இல்லைனா அந்த மாதிரி அந்த சிமெட்ரிக்கல் அந்த மாதிரி அந்த பியூட்டிஃபுல்லாக அடுக்கடுக்காக he would structure symmetrical phrases, and you can listen to some excerpts in his Surati and Madhyamavati now. With that, we now come to one of my personal favorite techniques that Ramnad Krishnan used, and that is how he handled the Shadjam and Panchamam in the way he sang his alapanas. Not only the way he sang them, but the way he would approach these notes. Adlen and the beauty aramikkum. And this was done with great musical delicateness and precision. It is very difficult to do both of these together. You can either be very, very and the bullseye precision, or you can be delicate, or vice versa. Usually one suffers at the end of the other. But to be able to sing both perfectly, he managed it. And there was no false voiced crooning at any point. There was full vocal thrust, even in that delicateness, even in the way he modulated his. There was optimal voice usage, which is very, very, very difficult as a vocalist to be able to carry off. And I will now play you an excerpt of his Keeravani, his very famous Keeravani recording from the Wesleyan concert, which is so powerful that till date I think it remains the ready reckoner for anybody who wants to get ideas or inspiration from Keeravani. In fact, T. Brinda, just before she passed away, is said to have told her son, Keeravaniya keta avar padidan kekano, Ramnad Krishnan padidan kekano. And his disciple, Srimati Rita Rajan, has also mentioned that he brought in the harmonic minor ideas from the Western classical minor chord, Keeravani, into his own rendition of the Sambadi phrases in Keeravani. I will now play you an excerpt from the Alapana and an excerpt from Kaligi Unte. Why I am playing this song specially is because I would like you to listen to how he approaches and then sings that Shadjam in the Anupallavi. And at the Padarcha, his accompanists, the Mridangam actually stops playing. Avlo avarku appadi or jnanam that he actually stopped playing at that point, and all you hear is that tuneful Shadjam with the Shruti. It's magical. Even in the more common ragams like Danyasi and Athana, you find that these were not the predictable versions when he sang them, with the appropriate brigas or with the appropriate gamakas and the shifts in Kala Pramanam and the pauses and the creative ideas. Even these ragams came alive in the way he sang them. But let's talk a little about the way he handled the minor ragams. Now, ragams like Balahamsa, Malavi, Umabharanam, Bahudari, Kannada, Purna Chandrika, Janaranjani, Jaya Manohari, Purna Sharjam. Now, these are ragas which are, first of all, very limited in scope. Secondly, they have very specific progressions up and down the scale without much scope for flexibility. And these are ragams that do not lend themselves to the usual approach of raga alapana that we use with other bigger ragams or more common ragams. Now, even these ragams came to life the way Ramnad Krishnan sang them, playing between a gamakam here and a nyasam there or a briga here. He just went straight to the heart of these ragams and he sang them as easily as he sang any other common ragams. Now, there is a beautiful recording of his Malavi where he has sung a short alapana, a very beautiful sedate Shri Manini, and just 3-4 rounds of Kalpana Swaram. And with that, we get the complete picture of this ragam. We don't need anything more in this ragam after we listen to this recording. Sorry, I think I said Malavi. I have so many recordings to play. I have so much to share with you. I don't think we have time. But this is Purna Sharjam. And I once went to a competition many years ago where it was a Tyagaraja Kriti competition, sorry. And when I went into the hall, I found that the judges were asking the participants to sing a short ragam, a short alapana for the songs that they had asked the competitors to sing. And I knew that Lavanya Rama was on that list that I had given for that competition, and I had no clue how to sing Purna Sharjam. So I was tense, came out of the room, and of course my mother was there, and I told her, "Ava Lavanya Rama keta na enna panna poren theriyaliye appdinu." She said, "Just calm down, take 5 or 6 phrases from the song itself, string it together, and you have your alapana there. Edha manage panna, onnume problem illa." And I did just that. And ஒரு 4 na 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 tarara na na rara na அந்த மாதிரி ஏதோ ஒரு 4-5 எடுத்து I just managed an outline and I actually got the prize. Why I'm saying this is because what I discovered that day is this: it was not just the composition and how beautiful it is, but it's how he sang it and how he gave the perfect raga bhavam even in that small song, which could actually with just 4 or 5 phrases bring out the alapana, the ragam, the bhavam of the ragam. So that was Ramnad Krishnan. He sang scalar ragams like Arabhi, Hamsadhvani, Gauri Manohari, and to some extent even Madhyamavati, which are very scale based and pretty low on gamakam or phrase complexity. Even these ragams he sang with the same flair, and not through the notes but through the essence of what could be done with these notes. He gave them an identity of their own, but never stretched beyond what the contours of the raga offered. He had a perfect sense of proportion and of limit. He was never one to dramatize, overemphasize. He was brief, he was contained, very precise in expression. And this again may have been a possible effect of the Dhanammal style. So to sum it all up, the raga shone through, it stood out through everything that Ramnad Krishnan sang, which is why today he is called a raga musician. Now we come to his Neraval. Again, whatever he sang, as I mentioned, whether it was compositions or creative aspects, the ragam always stood out. But there are a couple of interesting points when it comes to the Neraval. We notice that he seems to have chosen or preferred lines in the composition that were in the Madhyasthai, in the middle octave. So for example, he preferred to sing for Dhyanamu in Danyasi, he sang at Paradhananari. At Ninnuvinnagamari in Purvikilani, he sang at Paramalobhudanu. For Enduku Nirdaya in Harikambodi, he sang at Dharalo. And many more such examples. even in his rendition of Nerivals, we find that it's free flowing, but with a very tight grip on structure. The Kala Pramanam is tight. And even here, there is a beautiful balance between the robust and the softer phrases, which to manage in Nerivals is very difficult because half your attention is on the Sahityam, on the Talam. So to actually do this, we see that this was an internalized technique that he employed everywhere. So I'm now going to play you a brief excerpt of his Neraval of the famous Ammara Vamma recording. Next, we come to his Kalpana Swarams. His Sarvalagu Swarams with unusual, intricate, complex patterns is what he was really, really known for. Again, here the ragam was never sacrificed, whether he sang slow Kala Pramanam or the fast. And I'll again play you the same Amaravamma, the Swarams, the Kala Pramanam. In the Kala Pramanam, the Swaram பாடுறது first of all difficult. நல்லா யூஷுவல் பேட்டர்ன்ஸை பாடி இடத்துல கொண்டு போகிறதே கஷ்டம். அவர் இதில் புதுசாக வேற ஹியஸ் அன்யூஷுவல் எண்டிங்ஸ் சனி பதனி தமரச அப்படி பாடுறதே கஷ்டம். தனி நிகரி தம அதெல்லாம் வேற பாடியிருக்கார். அப்புறம் நடுவில் கார்வை கொடுத்து கண்டினியூஸ் ஸ்வரம்ஸ் பாடுறதே கஷ்டம் கண்டஜாப்புக்கு இந்த கால பிரமாணம்ல. அது நடுவில் நிறைய கார்வைஸ் வேற. ஸோ அண்ட் இன்க்ரெடிபிள் அக்கம்பனிஸ் லால்குடி சார் அண்ட் Karaikudi Mani sir. That magic that happens here when you listen to this recording is something else. Amaravama, 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 Kulasama, Nagumare, Saradabu, Parabu, The way he sang swarams even for minor ragams and the rare compositions with again the same intricate patterns at very difficult pace and for these kinds of unusual ragams is again a very ultimate challenge for a musician, but he did it very, very effortlessly and with full focus again on the raga bhavam. One more thing that he did is unusual ways of ending the swarams before the takeoff point. For example, in Sri Ranjani, in Bhuvini Dasudane, ಗರಿ ಗಮದ ಭುವಿನಿದ எல்லாரும் பாடுவோம். அவர் வந்து தனி மத ಭುವಿನಿದ அந்த ஐடியாவை எடுத்துட்டு தனி சமத ಭುವಿನಿத தனி சரி ಭುவிನಿத அது ஒன்னொன்னத்தையும் முடிக்கிறதும் அந்த கனெக்ட் பண்றதும் it would create another flavor of Sri Ranjani or of that ragam. I'll now play you that excerpt.
Dari damai da buvini da kudane. Dari dari damai dari da buvini da kudane. Dari dari gari dari gari dari damai dari da buvini da kudane. Dari dari gari dari 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 ga bhuvini da kudane. Dari dari ga mari gari dari 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 ga mari ga dari dari madani da gari mari bhuvini da kudane.
There is a lot more to share with you, but because of lack of time, I'm going to quickly run through just the next 2-3 segments. We now come to the concept of layam or his understanding of layam. As I mentioned earlier, layam does not necessarily mean keeping talam. There can be layam, there can be kala pramanam even when there is no talam. According to his brother Sri Raghavan, Ramnad Krishnan could keep impeccable talam even as a young boy when his guru sang Tirupuhars in very intricate and complex chanda talams to the accompaniment of the great percussionist Pudukkottai Dakshinamurthy Pillai. Now, he did not sing very slow, by the way. If you see Ramnad Krishnan's overall pace, it's not very slow. But he tended towards the older definition of Madhyama Kalam, which is actually faster than what we sing Madhyama Kalam like today. But through all his Madhyama Kalams, through his fast singing, we never feel anywhere that it was rushed, of one uncontrolled rush, of strain for both the singer and the listener. Sometimes fast speed பாடச்ச நம்ம கேட்கச்ச நம்மளுக்கு ஒரு டென்ஷன் இருக்கும், அப்பா எப்போ முடிக்க போகிறாளா, மூச்சு வாங்கி மார்வலி, அதெல்லாம் எதுவுமே கிடையாது. There is a sense of ease of Vishranti even in his fastest singing. And this I attribute only to the coming together of great skill and great clarity of thought, of how he seems to have internalized and understood the ragams, the compositions, the talam. There was no hesitation, no unsurety, no vagueness, no meandering. These words do not apply to him at all. And what is special is that it is practically impossible to sing like this always. All musicians have low phases or low days. But if you see, if you hear his recordings, he never sang. These things just don't apply to him. And I think that was the magic. And that was his special achievement. His impeccable sense of rhythm is evident in the way he renders so many compositions, kalpanaswarams, and even complex pallavis. For lack of time, I will not be playing these, but we have his Ragam Tanam pallavis in Bhairavi, Varali, Todi, and other ragams. And there is a beautiful story at this point which I want to share with you. One day, G.N. Balasubramaniam walked into his house. He was then the station director of All India Radio, and he requested Ramnad Krishnan to give them a recording of a Ragam Tanam Pallavi. And Ramnad Krishnan hesitated because he had just finished a previous recording of an RTP for the All India Radio. And he asked GNB why he wanted him to do another recording so soon. To which GNB said that they had just got some high quality tapes from Holland, and he wanted to record Ramnad Krishnan's RTP for posterity. So, of course, Ramnad Krishnan immediately agreed and he recorded an RTP, but we see this is how his contemporaries regarded his virtuosity in Layam. And interestingly, there was Layam even in his alapanas, even in his raga renditions. Certain phrases that he delivered at a certain speed with a certain kala pramanam, only then they are effective. If you sing the same phrase in any other kala pramanam, it is not effective. And that also he mastered. Of course, he was a master of singing virutams and shlokams, special again because this brings out the emotional quotient of the ragam and the sahityam, the lyrics. And we have beautiful recordings of many shlokams and virutams which he sang. He was also open to any genre of music that he found melodious, and he was very keenly fond of Hindustani music. In fact, his son Sri Ramanathan has told us a story of how once his father and his friend Raghava Rao gate crashed into the wedding of a leading film star's daughter just to be able to listen to Bade Ghulam Ali Khan's concert. And in the middle of the concert, at a high point, Ramnad Krishnan actually forgot that he was there without an invitation and he burst into loud appreciation. The influence of Hindustani music on Ramnad Krishnan is very evident in the way he set to tune two very beautiful compositions, Kalaya Yashode in Shuddha Sarang and Govardhana Giridhara in Darbari Kannada. His moving rendition of these remain unmatched till date, and what is noteworthy is that he handled even these ragas with a certain Carnatic aesthetic. And what is even more interesting is that when you hear him singing a Kannada, he will sing it with a full Carnatic flavor. And when he sings a Darbari Kannada, he sings it with the obvious Hindustani influences, but with a very delicate Carnatic touch. I will now play you the Darbari, the Govardhana Giridhara.
Govardhana Giridhara Govinda Gogula Pala Karunananda Govardhana Giridhara Govinda Gogula Pala Karunananda Govardhana Giridhara Sivadangire Sigo Suvadave Sivadangire Sigo Suvadave Pavaga Bayagara Pagibuda Pavaga Bayagara Pagibuda Govardhana Giridhara
Even when he sang a Sindhu Bhairavi or a Kapi or a Behag, he sang with the Carnatic Sampradaya Shuddham. He is said to have told his disciples that it was easier to sing ragams like Kapi and Sindhu Bhairavi with more of the Hindustani influences, but that he actually preferred and chose to sing it in the Carnatic style. There is so much more that can be said of his music, but I have to say here again that it is an experience. You have to experience his music, and I would like to say at this point that his son Sri Ramanathan, in his usual generous spirit, has launched a YouTube channel called the Ramnad Jukebox, where he has already uploaded and plans to upload a lot more of his father's music. I would urge all of you to please go and listen to all that wonderful music and experience Ramnad Krishnan's music. Also on the Mopa channel, there are certain episodes of several musicians talking about Ramnad Krishnan with relevant excerpts. Please enjoy all this great music. Before I conclude, I would like to thank once again my colleague Srimati Aruna Ranganathan and all the committee members of Rasika Ranjani Sabha for giving me this opportunity. I would also like to acknowledge, I cannot obviously name all the people that I have spoken about Ramnad Krishnan too, but I would like to acknowledge all of them, all the connoisseurs, all the senior musicians who have enriched my understanding of his music through their conversations. And I would like to thank my student, Harini Rangan, who worked painstakingly on this presentation that you saw today. And she put up with all my a million such things that I wanted of her. But the happy outcome of this is that she is now the latest and an eager member of the Ramnad Krishnan fan club. I will now conclude with just a couple of thoughts for you. As a society, we have always typecast what is successful and what is unsuccessful music. If Ramnad Krishnan had thought along those lines, he would not have sung unusual, rare ragams like a Palamanjari or a Uma Bharanam. He wouldn't have sung Padams and Javalis. In fact, he would not have even amalgamated elements from the Dhanamal style, because that was a style that was considered too subtle, too somber, and too serious to be widely appreciated by the general public. For all that he was so innovative, for all that he was so creative, at no point did he actually sacrifice the Carnatic elements in his expression, and this is actually very important to think of today, because we are so easily swayed by anything that is flamboyant, flashy, frilly, extravagant, theatrical, or full of gimmicks. His music was impactful and powerful and soul-touching without any of these elements. And that, I think, is his greatest achievement. A noted connoisseur and friend of Ramnad Krishnan is once supposed to have said to him, out of concern, of course, friendly concern, that if only you could sing keeping in mind some general audience taste and requirements, you will be more at the forefront, and probably the sabhas will actually be kinder to you. To this, Ramnad Krishnan replied, and I quote his translation, "I sing this music with full conviction, believing that it feeds my soul. Any material benefits that may arise out of my changing this music, I neither desire nor need." In fact, he even returned prematurely from a very lucrative assignment as visiting professor at the Wesleyan University because he missed being here. He missed his music, he missed his family, he missed singing to his friends and the local knowledgeable audience. The greatest tribute, I think, is today, more than 50 years after his passing, his music is still evergreen, fresh, relevant, powerful, sought after by all musicians, students of music, connoisseurs. Young musicians today, even 1.5 generations after his passing, still talk of the endless inspiration they derive from his music, still try to reproduce his signature phrases in their own renditions. His idea of musical beauty and aesthetics, his conceptualization of raga, the way he sang with just music as the priority and not for creating an impact on the audience or for applause, his ability to express a lot in just very little, The grace and elegance he brought into everything that he sang, even the most complex and technical aspects of music, and his unwavering integrity and belief in his own musical values. I think these are the qualities that all of us, all students, all aspiring musicians, and senior musicians could do very well to emulate. And that would be the greatest tribute to this great musician. Thank you.
Good morning, namaskaram. I cannot thank Savita enough in words for this absolutely impeccable presentation, which RR Sabha will treasure. Thank you for this contribution to RR Sabha's efforts in this theme, Music in Perpetuity. I think you have concluded so beautifully how Ramnad Krishnan's music is evergreen and how he would continue to be a source of inspiration, someone to emulate. I think we need a lot of that kind of music today. Just from RR Sabha's point of view, this whole Music in Perpetuity was conceived to bring forth some of the earlier composers of the Tyagaraja lineage this year, and the contribution they have made in the Kriti aspect of Kriti, Pallavis, Javalis, Varnams, etc. And some musicians, we couldn't choose many, but some musicians. And when you initially said something about you're a little apologetic about your bias to Ramnad Krishnan, I said without that bias and that passion, you couldn't be so deeply engrossed and bring forth so much of Ramnad Krishnan today. I think when we all say Ramnad Krishnan, which I share the same bias, so I can say that. When you say Ramnad Krishnan, you don't mean, we don't know who he is. We know his son here. And when I see his son, I'm happy enough to know maybe Ramnad Krishnan's son was, represents a little bit, he gives that energy. But we have with us Sri Spencer Venugopal, who lived with him, literally lives with his music, knew him so well, knew him so intimately. And they are all Rasikas of a different era. And when you speak, I know your Rasikatvam and how much you yourself are so nuanced in your taste for music, Savita, without which you couldn't be talking about Ramnad Krishnan the way you did. Every aspect that you spoke of today, whether it was the Alapana or the Manodharma aspect, so to speak, as well as there's not much you can explain about music in words. Like you said, it's an experience. And it is this experience that I have shared several times with Ramanathan, sometimes with Venugopal Mama, sitting in the evenings across a cup of coffee or tea and listening to Ramnad Krishnan. And every other second and every other, phrase, just say, and that's what happens to all of us. We get so, it's intoxicating. So I would only conclude by saying this was a magical presentation like Ramnad Krishnan's magical music. It had the same genteel qualities as Ramnad Krishnan himself had, the same etiquette he presented through his music. And the presentation cannot be anything less than that. They say, you can become just by doing just acts. You can become temperate by doing temperate acts. So I think your presentation represents that temperate, moderate, beautifully presented morning lecture today. Thank you so much, Savita. Thank you.
இங்கிலீஷில் தான் பேசணுமே என்ன கொஞ்சம் தமிழில் பேசலாமா காத்தால இல்லை சவிதாவை ஒன் ஆஃப் தி பிரில்லியன்ட் பாடகியாக எங்கள் எல்லாருக்கும் தெரியும். ஆனால் பேசியே என்னால் பாட்டை காட்ட முடியும் அப்படின்னு ஐ திங்க் இன்றைக்கி சவிதா ப்ரூவ் பண்ணான்னாக்கா அது மிக ஆகாது. ஒன் ஆஃப் த பிரில்லியன்ட் ப்ரெசன்டேஷன். If only RR Sabha is authorized to offer doctorate for somebody on Ramnad Krishnan's, the entire philosophy being now, probably even ராமநாதனுக்கே தெரிஞ்சிருக்காதீங்க. ராமநாதன் ஒன்னேன்னு சொன்னார் என்கிட்ட, நீங்கள் பையன் ஒரு பெரிய பொக்கிஷத்தினுடைய பையன், நீங்கள் இந்த ப்ரோக்ராமுக்கு நீங்கள் 2 வாரத்தை பேசிவிட்டு அதுக்கப்புறம் நான் சவிதாவை ஆரம்பிக்க சொல்கிறேன்னு. அவர் சொன்னார், நான் எங்கள் அப்பாவுக்கு பண்ணுற ஒரு நல்ல காரியம் பாடாமல் இருக்கிறது தான். ஆனால் ராமநாதன் வந்து உட்கார்ந்து ஒரு கச்சேரியை அவர் ரசித்தார்னா அவருடைய இன்பில்ட் அண்ட் ஒரு இனரண்ட் தி நாலெட்ஜ் அண்ட் தி கைண்ட் ஆஃப் அப்ரிஷியேட்டிவ் குவாலிட்டி அதை நம்ம பார்த்து ரசிக்கணும். அவரை ரசிக்கிறதே ஒரு ரசனையாக இருக்கும், அதுதான் உண்மை. ஆனால் வெளியில் காட்டிக்கொள்ளாத ஒரு பிறவி, அது ஒரு ஒரு தனி பிறவி தான். எங்கள் வேணுகோபால் மாமா வந்திருக்கார். அவர்கிட்ட சொன்னேன், மாமா நீங்கள் தான் அவரோடையே இருந்து பாட்டை கேட்டு ரசித்து அவருக்கு ஒரு சென்டினரி செலிப்ரேட் பண்ணோம் நம்ம தக்ஷாமூர்த்தி ஆடிட்டோரியத்தில். அவர் பேசினது ராமநாதன் கிருஷ்ணன் இருந்து பார்க்க, ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணன் இருந்து பார்க்கலையேன்னு தோணித்து. அந்த மாதிரி பேசினார். அது அது இன்றைக்குமே எனக்கு மனசில் அதை ரீங்காரம் விட்டுட்டே இருக்குது. அவர் வந்து இருந்து ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணனுக்கு ஒரு டிபியூட் பண்ணும்பொழுது அவர் பேசணும்னு நினச்சேன். அவர் சொன்னார், உனக்கு தெரியாது, நீ சின்ன பையன், நீ இன்னைக்கு கூப்பிட்டுருக்கிற ஆசாமி இருக்காளே அவளுக்கு தெரியறத விட எனக்கு ஒன்றும் தெரியாது அப்படின்னார். அது ஏதோ சும்மா அப்படித்தான் சொல்லுவா, எல்லோரும் பெரியவாள் அப்படித்தான் சொல்லுவா. நமக்கு தான் கொஞ்சம் சின்னங்கள்லேயே 2 கும்பம் குதிச்சுன்னு இருப்போம், பெரியவாள்னா அப்படி தான் இருப்பா அப்படின்னு நினச்சிட்டேன். ஆனால் இப்போ தோன்றது, அவர் எந்த அளவுக்கு சவிதாவை புரிஞ்சுன்னு இருக்கார், சவிதா எந்த அளவுக்கு ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணனோட அப்படியே மானசீகமாக ஒன்னி போயிட்டா அப்படிங்கிறது ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணன் ஃபேமிலிக்கே இந்த ஒரு எபிசோட் பாசிபிளி குட் பி பிக்கஸ்ட் பொக்கிஷமாக இருக்கும்னு நினைக்கிறேன். இதை விட ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணனை அனலைஸ் பண்ணியிருக்கக்கூடிய ஒருத்தர் இருக்க முடியுமா அப்படின்னு தெரியல. எனக்கு பாட்டே தெரியாது, ஞானசூன்யம். ஆனாலும் இந்த மாதிரி ஒருத்தரை விட்டு 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 விட்டா அனலைஸ் பண்ணி பேச முடியணும்னா அவள் எவ்வளோ தூரத்தில் அவளை புரிஞ்சுன்னு இருக்கணும். இது வந்து சும்மா ஒரு பாட்டை கேட்டுட்டு பேசுகிறதோ, ஒரு ஒரு எங்கேயோ ஒரு ஆர்டிக்கல் இருந்து, ஒரு விக்கிபீடியாவில் ஒரு ஆர்டிக்கல் இருக்குது, உடனே அதை எடுத்து நான் பார்த்துட்டு இங்கே வந்து பேச வரதோ, அதெல்லாம் பண்ண முடியாது. அவளை அனுபவிச்சிருக்கணும். த வே இன் விச் ஹி ஹஸ். அதான் சொன்னேனே, 1.5 மணி நேரம் பேச்சுங்கிறது எங்களுக்கு பாட்டாக இருந்தது. ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணன் கிட்டேயே நாங்கள் கொண்டு போயிட்டா மாதிரி இருந்தது. அதில் இன்னொரு ஒரு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமான சமாச்சாரம் எங்களுக்கு என்னென்னா, ஒரு 5-6 கிளிப்பிங்கில் நான் ஆர்ஆர் சபாவை பார்த்தேன், எங்கள் பழைய ஆர்ஆர் சபாவை பார்த்தேன். எனக்கு ஆர்ஆர் சபா தான் இன்றைக்குமே ஒரு வாஞ்ச. 81லேருந்து இருக்கேன். இடிக்கிறதுக்கு முன்னாடி இருந்தேன், இடித்த பொழுது இருந்தேன், இடித்த பொழுது எங்களை இடித்தவாளோடையும் இருந்தேன். அப்புறம் ஒரு மாதிரி இது கட்டி இன்றைக்கி ஒரு பெரிய லெவலில் வந்து, ஆனாலும் நாங்கள் வேறு மாதிரி கஷ்டப்படுவோமா இருக்கும். ஆனால் சபா ஒரு ஆல் இண்டியா லெவலில் இன்றைக்கி ஒரு ஒரு எடுத்துக்காட்டான ஒரு ஆடிட்டோரியமாக இருக்குங்கிறத வேணுகோபால் மாதிரியோ நம்ம ராமநாதன் மாதிரி இருக்கிறவாள்லாம் ஹார்ட்டை அப்ரிஷியேட் பண்ணியிருக்கா. அதனால் அந்த மாதிரி இடத்துல எங்களுக்கு எங்களுடைய பழைய சபாவையும் இதில் ஞாபகப்படுத்தி, ராமநாத கிருஷ்ணனை மட்டும் இல்லை எங்கள் சபாவையும் ஞாபகப்படுத்தி அவள் வந்து கொண்டு வந்து எங்களுக்கு காமிச்சதுங்கிறது ரொம்ப அபூர்வமான விஷயம். அவள் அம்மாவை பற்றி சவிதா நடுப்புற ஒரு தடவை சொன்னான். அவள் அம்மா தான் அவளுக்கெல்லாம் மோட்டிவேஷன். ரொம்ப நல்ல சோல். ரீசன்ட்லி ஷீ பாஸ்ட் அவே. அதனால் அது அவள் சிஸ்டர்லாம் எங்களோட தான் இருக்கோம், நாங்கள்லாம் நெய்பர்ஸ், அதெல்லாம் வேறு விஷயம். பட் ஒரு 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 பெரிய கடலை 1.5 மணி நேரத்தில் சுருக்கி பாட்டையே பேச்சாக மாற்றி பேச்சு பாட்டு மாதிரி இருக்கும்படியாக பண்ணக்கூடிய ஒருத்தர் உண்டுன்னா அது சவிதாவாக தான் இருக்க முடியும். அண்ட் அது ராமநாத கிருஷ்ணனுடைய மகத்துவமாக தான் இருக்க முடியும். அப்படிங்கிறதுல ஒரு விதமான ஐயப்பாடும் இல்லை. இந்த டயத்தில் வேணுகோபால் மாமா ஒரு நிமிஷம் எங்களுக்காக இங்கே வரணும், 2 வார்த்தை பேசணும். நாங்கள் ஒரு சின்ன மரியாதை பண்ணுவோம், அதை ஏற்றுக்கணும். ராமநாதன் அவருடைய சன் இங்கே வரணும், சபாக்காக இங்கே வரணும், ஒரு நிமிஷம் இங்கே வந்து அவள் அப்பாவை பற்றி ஒரு வார்த்தை பேசணும். அதுக்கு பாட வேண்டாம், பேசணும். நான் என்ன சொன்னேன் நீங்கள் பேசணும்னு தான் சொல்லியிருக்கேன். அதனால் ஒரே ஒரு நிமிஷம் வரணும், ஒரு சின்ன மரியாதையை ஏற்றுக்கிண்டு நீங்கள் 2 பேருமா அவளுக்கு ஆன் பிஹாஃப் ஆஃப் சபா மரியாதை பண்ணணும். வாங்க 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 வாங்க, ப்ளீஸ் கம், ப்ளீஸ் கம், ப்ளீஸ் கம், ப்ளீஸ் கம். எங்களுக்கு பேச தெரியாதவாள்லாம் பேசுகிறோம், பேச தெரிஞ்சவா பேச வேண்டாமா? வாங்க ப்ளீஸ் கம். அது
நமஸ்காரம், எல்லாருக்கும் நமஸ்காரம்.
கிரேட் ராமநாதன், இவர் தான் கிரேட் ராமநாதன்.
ரீசன் நத்திங் கிரேட் அதர் தென் பீங் born to him. பட் நிஜமாகவே அவர் சொன்னதில் ஒரு இம்பார்ட்டன்ட் பாயிண்ட் முக்கியம். இது நான் ஜஸ்ட் கோட் ஒன் திங். சங்கரையர், தஞ்சாவூர் சங்கரையர் ட்ரான்ஸ்ஃபர் அப்பா எனக்கு ரொம்ப தெரிஞ்சவர். அப்பா போய் ரொம்ப வருஷத்துக்கு அப்புறம் பக்கத்தில் ஒரு ஸ்கூலில் வேலை இருந்தது. ஒரு 2-3 நாளைக்கு எங்கிட்ட ராவில் தான், ஒரு வாரத்துக்கு அப்புறம் அந்த விட்டுட்டு போயிட்டார். பத்தியாரை வந்து சாப்பிட்டு கொஞ்சம் ரெஸ்ட் எடுத்துன்னு போவார். பாட்டு கேட்டுட்டு இருந்தோம். ஏதோ ஒரு சுருட்டி போட்டோம். அப்புறம் இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் எதாவது போட்டோம். இன்னொரு சுருட்டி வந்து நிறுத்துன்ட்டார். என்னன்னோ இல்லை, உங்கள் அப்பா ஒரு வாட்டியும் சுருட்டி விவரமாக போடுவா, எல்லாமே நல்லாயிருக்கும். ஸோ இன்றைக்கி இது போகிறோம், நான் நாளைக்கு வந்து கேட்டுக்கிறேன் அடுத்தது அப்படின்னார். அது சொல்லிவிட்டு அதுக்கு என்ன தோணித்தோ தெரியல, ஒரு பிரமாதமான உண்மையை சொல்லிட்டார். இப்படியே என்னை பார்த்தார். நீ வேணா அவர் பையனாக இருக்கலாம், ஆனால் எனக்கு அவர் சங்கீதத்தை புரிஞ்ச அளவுக்கு உனக்கு புரியலன்னார். இதே உண்மையான வார்த்தை. இப்போ நான் ஷேர் மை ஓன் சீக்ரெட். அப்பா போகிறச்சு அப்பா பாட்டை யாரும் கேட்டு தானே ஆகணும். தட் வாஸ் மை லெவல். கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சம் கேட்பேன், அதுக்கு மேலே தெரியாதுன்னா. when he died he was 54 and I was 22 plus. Rita's husband Rajan, Venugopal sir, இவா தான் இந்த பாட்டு இல்லை இது நல்லா இருக்குன்ற மாதிரி. ஏன்னா அப்பா பாட்டு எனக்கு பாசம் தானே. ஐ டோன்ட் நீட் எனி எக்ஸ்ட்ரா இன்ஃப்ளூயன்ஸ் ஃபார் தட். எல்லோரும் சொல்கிறச்சே அப்பா பற்றி சொல்கிறாங்கிறது சந்தோஷமாக தான் இருக்கும். பட் எனக்கு அது புரியும்படியாக பண்ணது அவள் 2 பேர். இப்போது ரீசெண்ட் டைட்டில் அருணா திருப்பி போட்டு இதை போடு கேளு அப்படின்னு என்னையே சொல்லுவாள். அந்த கட்டத்துக்கு they have helped me to understand this music better. And at this point of time, அப்பா பாடினாலும் என்னோட சார்பிலேருந்து I offer my profound thanks to Rajan sir, Aruna, Savita, Venugopal and people like that. இது ஒண்டர்ஃபுல் ஈவினிங். சார்கிட்ட நான் சொல்லிகிட்டு இருந்தேன், முதல்ல எங்கள் அம்மா அப்பா சைடில் பரம்பரை அதுக்கு மேலே கிடையாது, அம்மா சைடில் உண்டு. எங்கள் அம்மாவோட தாத்தா தான் உமையார்புலம் கோதண்டராமையர்னு மிருதங்கம் பிளேயர். அவர் மிருதங்கம் வாசிந்தார். அப்புறம் கொஞ்சம் கை முடியலையும் போயிட்டார். சீனிவாசையர் அவரை ட்ரிவாண்ட்ரம் ஆக்ஷன் போயிட்டு கடம் மாறி கடத்தில் முதல் கான்சர்ட் நடந்தது மதுரமணியர் சாருக்கு இந்த ஆர்ஆர் சபாவில். அதுலேருந்து தான் became உமையாள்புரம் கோதண்டராமையர் as a கடம் வித்வான் மோஸ்ட் பாப்புலர். played till his last time to MS and everybody else. அதனால் இந்த ஒரு வசதியான விஷயம் இங்கே நடந்ததுக்கு எனக்கு ரெட்டிப்பு சந்தோஷம். I have no words to thank C. Nagarajan sir and Aruna for this wonderful day. Thank you.
வேணுகோபால் சார் ஒரு 2 வார்த்தை பேசுவார். அவளோட இருந்த வேலை பார்க்கறதுக்கே நமக்கெல்லாம் கொடுத்து வச்சுருக்கணும். அவள் பேசுகிறதுக்கு ஆல் த மோர் கேட்டு வச்சுருக்கணும்.
நமஸ்காரம். சங்கீதத்துக்கு நான் அறிமுகமானது என்னுடைய வாழ்க்கையில் பல நாட்கள் கழித்து. எனக்கு இப்பொழுது 92 வயசாகிறது. ஒரு 50 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னால் சங்கீதத்தில் நான் ஓரளவு அறிமுகம் பெற்றுக்கொண்டேன். முதலாக இந்த அறிமுகத்தை எனக்கு செய்து வைத்தவர் ராகவராவ் என்கின்ற ஒரு நண்பர். ராமநாதன் அவர்களுக்கு தெரியும். ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணன் அவர்களுக்கு நெருங்கிய நண்பர். ஒவ்வொரு நாளும் அவர்கள் சந்தித்து சம்பாஷித்து சண்டையும் போட்டுக்கொள்ள வேண்டும். அந்த அளவுக்கு நெருக்கமானவர்கள். ஒரு நண்பருடைய வீட்டிற்கு விருந்துக்காக சென்றிருந்தேன். அந்த நண்பருடைய பெண் பாடுவாள். அந்த பெண்ணை பாடச் சொல்லி கேட்டார். நான் சொன்னேன், எனக்கு சங்கீதத்தை பற்றி ஒன்றும் தெரியாது. இல்லை, நீங்கள் கேளுங்கள். கேட்டேன். அதற்கு பிறகு அவர் சொன்னார், இன்று இந்த என்னுடைய பெண்ணுக்கு சங்கீதம் கற்பித்த குருவும் வந்திருக்கிறார், அவருடைய பாட்டையும் நீங்கள் கேட்க வேண்டும். அப்பொழுதுதான் நான் முதலாக ராகவராவ் அவர்களை சந்தித்தேன். அவர் பாடினார். பாடின பாட்டு லாவண்யா ராமா. எனக்கு அப்பொழுது இந்த லாவண்ய ராமா என்ன ராகம் என்ன ஸ்வரம் ஒன்றுமே தெரியாது. ஆனாலும் மெய்மறந்து போய்விட்டேன். பாடி முடித்ததற்கப்புறம் உங்களுடைய சங்கீதம் எனக்கு ரொம்ப பிடித்திருக்கிறது, இதை அதிகம் கேட்க வேண்டும் போல் தோன்றுகிறது. இந்த கீர்த்தனை யாருடைய கீர்த்தனை, இது என்ன ராகம் என்று அவர் சொன்னார். மேலும் ஒரு விவரத்தை சொன்னார். இந்த கீர்த்தனை நான் பயின்றது ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணன் என்கின்ற வித்வானிடமிருந்து. அப்பொழுதுதான் எனக்கு ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணன் யார் என்ற ஒரு விவரமே தெரிந்தது. ஆக ராகவராவ் மூலமாக ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணனை பரிச்சயம் செய்து கொண்டேன். அதன் பின்னால் பிருந்தா அவர்கள், இப்படி என்னுடைய ஒரு சங்கீத வாழ்க்கை தொடர்ந்தது. ஆக இந்த லாவண்ய ராமா என்கின்ற கீர்த்தனை கேட்கும் பொழுதெல்லாம் நமக்கு மன்னிக்க வேண்டும், மனதிலே தோன்றுவது தியாகராஜ சுவாமிகள் அல்ல, ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணன் தான். அந்த அளவுக்கு சில ராகங்கள், சில கீர்த்தனைகள் இவற்றை கேட்கும் பொழுதெல்லாம் தானே முன்னின்று நமக்கு ஒரு ஆனந்தத்தை அளிக்கின்ற ஒரு அனுபவம் ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணனுடைய சங்கீதம் தரக்கூடியது. சில சங்கீதத்தை பற்றியெல்லாம் பேச சொன்னால் வித்வான்கள் வந்து பேசுவார்கள். அவருடைய சங்கீதம் வார்த்தைகளால் சொல்ல முடியாது அப்படி என்று சொல்லி முடித்து விடுவார்கள். ஆனால் இன்று வார்த்தைகளாகவே சொல்லி ஒரு சாதித்த ஒரு பெருமை சவிதாவுக்கு உண்டு. அந்த அளவுக்கு அந்த சங்கீதத்திலே திளைத்து ஊறி ஒரு ஆனந்தத்தை அனுபவித்த ஒரு கலைஞர். அதாவது ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணன் வாழ்க்கை காலத்திலே பிறந்திருக்காத கலைஞர்கள் எல்லாம் இன்று ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணனுடைய சங்கீதத்தை போற்றுகிறார்கள், ஆராய்ச்சி செய்கிறார்கள், அனுபவிக்கிறார்கள் என்றால் இது ஒரு சாதாரணமான ஒரு சாதனை அல்ல. இப்படி எந்த ஒரு வித்வானுக்கும் நடந்ததாக நான் கேள்விப்பட்டதில்லை. இதுதான் ராமநாதபுரம் கிருஷ்ணன். அந்த பெருமை என்று நம்முடைய முன்னாலே அவ்வளவு அற்புதமாக தத்ரூபமாக நிலைநாட்டி காண்பித்த ஒரு திறமைக்காகவும் கலை ஞானத்திற்காகவும் சவிதா எவ்வளவோ பாராட்டுக்குரியவர்கள். என்னுடைய பாராட்டுக்கள். ஏதோ ஒரு கேட்க வேண்டும் என்று வந்த ஒரு நிகழ்ச்சியிலே என்னை பேச வேண்டும் என்று வற்புறுத்திய இவரை நண்பர் என்று சொல்வதா அல்லது வேறு என்று சொல்லுவதா என்ற ஒரு நிலையில் இருக்கிற நண்பர் என்று சொல்லலாம். வணக்கம்.
ஹலோ, ஸோ ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணன் சாரோட ஸ்டைல் வந்து இட்ஸ் அமால்கமேஷன் ஆஃப் ஜிஎன்பி சாரோட சாயல் நிறையா இருக்கும். அண்ட் தென் ஆல்சோ தனமால் பாணியோட சில ஆஸ்பெக்ட்ஸையும் பார்க்க முடியும். அண்ட் ஆல்சோ ஹி ஹேட் டிஸ்டிங்டிவ் ஸ்டைல் ஆஃப் ஹிஸ் ஓன் ப்ரெசன்டேஷன். அவர் வந்து இப்போது பழைய காலத்தில் கேவிஎன் மாமா கேட்டாலோ இல்லை ராம்நாத் கிருஷ்ணன் சார் கேட்டாலோ ஃபாஸ்ட் ஃப்ரேசஸ், அந்த பேஸ் ஃபாஸ்ட்டாக இருந்தாலும் அதில் ஒரு சௌக்கியம் இருந்தது கேட்குறதுக்கு. ஸோ வேர் டு யூ திங்க் இந்த ஆஸ்பெக்ட் ஓட லாஸ் ஏன் இருக்குது? அண்ட் தென் இதை ஒரு ஆர்டிஸ்ட்டாக இப்போ ப்ரிவென்ட் பண்ணுறதுக்கு என்ன எஃபர்ட்ஸ் எடுக்கணும்?
I think actually நிறைய ரீசன்ஸ் இருக்கலாம். If I start talking about that, அது நிறைய நாளாகும். But if you want me to pin it down, the saukyam that you hear in the music comes from the saukyam in their heart. That the times that they lived in, the way they lived, the way they practiced, the way they thought about music, there was a lot of time. They weren't rushing morning to evening doing a million things, no social media, none of all that. They were there with their music, immersed in it. That is one reason. Second reason also is that any musician needs a lot of time, not only to practice, to think, just be in the music. Adu panna panna, that's when you actually get to understand your own style. You get to figure out so many things about your music. அது எல்லாத்துக்கும் வந்து ஒரு டைம் வேணும், which is what I think all those musicians had. And that is why each musician's style is so unique, right? It's because they understood, they had time to think about their own styles, their music, how they enjoyed it themselves. The second reason is because they had full conviction in what they sang. They enjoyed it themselves. That's where it came from.
One thing I remembered from the that is stuck in my mind is the usage of unusual notes. I think the peculiar two examples that you did state were Sadharana Gandharam in Sahana and Kaisik Nishadam in Purna Chandrika. Could those maybe both be chalked up to just archaisms? Because both of those, if Pradashnila ninga paathelna, right? Not at that time, but it was there like sometime before that. Was very different.
So see, today we know grammar only from today's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? At least as far as practical concert music goes. The one theory is that as far as practical concert music goes, we can only sing a ragam the way we know it today. We don't know how those great composers picturized the ragam, or how it was even sung 100 years ago. We don't know. Every musician has added his or her own touch, and that's how the ragams have grown. That is tradition. Tradition is not a fossilized something that stays. It grows, it changes. But the changes, the ragam that we know today is as we know it today. So if we were to try and imagine how it may have been, or just sing out of a notation, I don't know how much we can do justice to the ragam that we know today. So, but for a Ramnad Krishnan to have sung these kind of unusual notes, it just shows that I don't think he thought about it as a grammatical, na oru Kaisika Nishadam paadrene, or and mari or you never find that unsurety in his music. I think he saw Purna Chandrika even in that. That's all I can say of that.
No, I just wanted to ask you one more question. இந்த விஷயத்துலலாம் அவளோட அக்காம்பனிஸ்ட்ஸ் எல்லாம் அதை எப்படி அட்ஜஸ்ட் பண்ணி வாசிச்சா அப்படிங்கிறது you have to explain.
I think the first thing I have to tell you here is that what we call the accompanist musicians is just a term. They were all great musicians of their own accord, actually. And when the magic happened, because these great minds came together like this. It was not just a mridangam or a violin. Each one had music in their psyches. They were sensitive musicians, all of them. So when such people came together on stage, I think all it took is for a Ramnad Krishnan to launch into a Lavanya Rama, and they got into that zone along with it, or any other musician for that matter. So that is why this synchronization happened on stage.